Good morning, kiddos. This morning we're going to be talking about the potential for. Good morning, kiddos. This morning we're going to be talking about. I don't want to hear me talking. You want to hear me talking. That was me working on finishing up some last minute stuff on the back end, and the show started playing live simultaneously. Fun. All right, we're going to be talking about the potential for immortality to be developed in science in the future. Good God, I just got all kind of random noises popping up this morning. Let's just do a damn show. Rah! And good morning. How we doing this morning? I see James is with us. I see Jeff Goldblum's Silent Farts. Danny is with us. It's Tuesday morning, so I suspect that means that Danny put out. I haven't seen it yet, sweetheart, but that means you put out a new vlog post yesterday, and you also go check that out. I see Stryker and I see Pitt. Danny, Dan, it's the first full week of the month, and so that means this Thursday, hopefully, fingers crossed, we'll have the GOP meeting at Amici, and we will not be edged out by a double booking with some random financial guru, because we've had that happen twice, not 2 months in a row, but twice now. I've showed up to set up a camera, and it's like, who the hell are you people? Or what do you want? Oh, and Cameron hits us with, who wants to live forever? You know, that's a great question. And yes, the answer to the question, who wants to live forever, is everybody. Everybody wants to live forever. Nominally. There are functional exceptions, sort of, but what we're about to be talking about is medically induced immortality. So here's the claim, and I've got a couple of different articles here. This one is here. We'll go with this one from the Science Times. Live forever, humans could reach immortality in 8 years through nanobots, says former Google engineer. I don't know why it says 8 years in this one. This is a recent printing, and the claim is by 2030. Now, I'll be fair, that prediction, he says by 2030. I mean, potentially that could mean next year or the year after. But here's the basic idea. While the idea of immortality has crossed the minds of several individuals and specialists before, a former Google engineer has made a bold claim that humans may reach immortality in 8 years. According to the Daily Mail, the former Google engineer, Ray Kurzweil, spoke to the Adagio YouTube channel and brought up robotics, genetics, and nanotechnology expansions. Kurzweil specifically thinks that these advancements will lead to the development of nanobots that could reverse age. So I've mentioned this a few times on the show. About 20 years or so ago, I read an article in Scientific America, Scientific American, that claimed that within 30 years, and again, this was 20 years ago, that within 30 years, we would be able to live longer. At that time, it didn't actually make a claim of immortality. Rather, what it claimed was that we would live for if you could survive until 2030 at the time, that the result would be you would live until you were at least 150. Now, Kurzweil's explanation is similar, except his prediction takes into account the kind of the baseline theory of the singularity. So the singularity is this concept. It's very complex. I can't do a deep dive of it justice in the 30 minutes that I do the show for in the morning. And this is something, Cameron, the singularity, the gray goo, all that would make for a great like a Saturday or Sunday morning hangout on the Locals channel that could make for some great, very long form 3-4 hour conversation type content. But broadly, the concept of the singularity is this point at which science and technology and the speed of computer power so far outstrip the human mind that it no longer becomes possible to advance usefully further without a direct biotechnological integration. So, like right now, our computers generally can process data and store data to a much greater degree than the human mind can process it. But we're still at a point where the ability to replicate, represent, and display that data through devices like a PC with a dozen monitors or a smartphone in your pocket, etc. Even sucking down audio books at double speed and being able to understand everything you're hearing and retain large quantities of it. We're still at a point where the output does not outstrip our capacity as flesh beings to process at least nominally useful information from that general output. But the singularity idea rests on, I forget the name of the principle, but the idea is that every time you increase the rate of communication technology, you also increase the rate of the increase, right? And we're talking, now we're getting into predictive mathematics models based on long-term predictive models attempting to calculate the differential equation of rate of advancement. So, you start with the written language, and all of a sudden you can send letters, and letters take, at least days to cover space and get from one person to the next, and then the telephone happens. Now, it's not just that I can make a phone call and instantaneously transmit what until this development. No, I know you got the telegraph and other stuff in between there, but you get to the point where you have instantaneous communication or near instantaneous communication. And suddenly it's not just that you've increased the speed at which you can communicate, but now it means that I can communicate ideas, objectives, orders, and directives near instantaneously, which means that the timeline between generating a missive and having a response to the missive shrinks that much faster, which means that all of the stuff that follows the communication happens sooner. And when you take the entire global community and you remove the delay between communication and result, you've essentially just created a functional mechanism of theoretical time travel, because now the future is closer. That happens at every step of the way along technological development. You get a faster computer chip, and now your ability to figure the calculations and do the math and do the design work on the next faster computer chip happens faster than it could have with the prior computer chip, which is being replaced. What Kurzweil gets into a bit is that almost in reverse on the medical side, because on the medical side, when you start talking about the question of achieving immortality through technology and science, the problem is people living long enough for the people who are working on it and for the people who are being worked on to actually achieve the objective. But when you get to the point that the medical science allows a person to double their expected age, and 150 is not quite doubling from the current, it's pretty damn close though. So if suddenly the people who would have died off of natural causes at, say, 75, 80, even 90 years old, suddenly they're going to live for 70, 60, 70, 80 years more and continue to do the work that they were doing. And this is baseline stuff that I'm covering here, because this is a very complex long-term view. Essentially, the scientists that are developing the immortality, because they can now hang around and continue that development even longer, you're adding time to the process. So in the previous example, you're subtracting delay from the process, which increases the rate of development. But against the question of immortality and medical science of that nature, the problem of a key problem is the time it takes to develop that. So now you have the rate of advance shrinking down the time requirement to process, coupled with the expansion of life expectancy, increasing the amount of time in which you can process. So you take the impossible and you squeeze it down to a smaller object while simultaneously prying open the container that it has to fit in. As an approach to the singularity, what we're talking about here is a potential future in which human beings are functionally immortal. Now, immortal may not be the right word here. They say immortality, undying, perhaps, extreme longevity, right? You may be able to defeat natural death of old age, even sickness. Obviously, there will still be accidents, there will still be murders, there will still be, at least for a time, there will still be wars. That could be changed by the singularity situation. But the idea of living forever, Cameron asked the question, who wants to live forever? And yeah, I know he's riffing on the song, but I also know that that's a smart motherfucker there, and he's not just quoting a fantastic lyric from an old television show theme that, let's be real, is one of the greatest television shows ever. Everybody wants to live forever at some level. At some level, right? We're born with a natural, instinctive fear of heights, but not a fear of death. You have a natural, instinctive fear of heights because, frankly, the monkeys that didn't fell down and died and didn't replicate. But that natural fear of heights comes from the genetic, biological imperative to preserve one's life against peril. Eventually, somebody passes away. It might be a dog, it might be a grandparent. Somebody leaves your world forever, and you are confronted with the existential crisis, the ennui of why does it matter? What can I possibly do that's going to matter? I've already lived half of my life. What can I possibly do that's going to matter if I'm going to breathe my last in a few spare winks? So everybody, I don't care who your God is, how good you are with your God. You want to go to heaven, but you don't want to go today. When you have this conversation with your friends, I've had this conversation with my friends, and we've all, at least tongue-in-cheek, jokingly, offered to unplug one another, right? No, if I'm ever that bad off, you just end me, right? But what if, and keep in mind, this is an important part of the equation, what if, as Kurzweil predicts, it's achieved through a set of technology that includes nanobots, genetic treatments, etc., which doesn't just extend your probable longevity, doesn't just double and double and double. See, that's part of it too. It's the double and double and double. I'll get back to that in just a second. But it doesn't just extend your probable longevity, your maximum life expectancy, but cures those things: dementia, palsy, paralysis, liver cancer, lung cancer. You know, you've got this nanotechnology which solves away your pains and your dis-ease. So it doesn't just make you live longer, it makes you live longer, healthy and comfortable. Right? Part of what he says is not just that your life will be extended, but he uses the phrase, where did I put that article? He uses this language. Okay, so it says, may reach immortality. This right here will lead to the development of nanobots that can reverse age. Alex McDonald says, great, we'll be slaves to the Marxist society until we're 300. You know what, Alex? I fucking love you. Thank you. Perfect. I don't necessarily disagree. Here's the trick, though. There's a couple of tricks here. Okay, so now we get to go into some sci-fi. I got 12 minutes left on the clock, so we're going to play with this a little bit. And Alex, you just made the rest of the show, my man, because here we go. There are 2 reasons that an actual socialist utopia cannot exist on Earth today. Scarcity of resources and individual greed. So, in theory, an actual socialist utopia does not have a government. In fact, it would be an anarcho-communist utopia. Now, what that would look like is that there is no commerce or trade because you have a world where there is 100% unexhaustible energy and resources. Everybody can just plug in whatever device they want anytime they want to. It will work, and you never have to wonder where your food is coming from, ever. And I don't mean like I'm sure I can go to the grocery store and spend some money and buy food. I mean, it's not possible for the grocery store to run out because I've got a replicator that just condenses ambient energy from an infinitely available grid, Star Trek, Star Trek, Star Trek, and creates whatever it is that I need. So, right now, we are living in a time where people who actually lived under serious communist regimes, right? Russians who remember actual communism, Cubans who remember actual communism, right? Germans who remember the Nazis, who actually experienced that. We're running out of those people. The people who are alive today, who actually experience those things, are either so old that they're not actually communicative for the most part, right? We don't hear these people's stories, or they were so young that even though they were alive at that time, they don't remember much about it to discuss it. And they certainly don't remember much about giving serious thought to the geopolitical and economic ramifications of their situation at the time, right? So we're at a point in history now where real legitimate national level communism has not been directly experienced by a large number of people who are capable of communicating valuable information from that experience. If those people were living and staying young and healthy for the next 100 or 300 or 1,000 years, their testimony of their experiences alone would go a long way to prevent that Marxism from occurring. Right? If you suddenly had the entire population of Germany that remembered what it was like under the Nazi regime, saying, okay, hold on a minute. We remember not speaking up and hanging on to our guns. We remember what happened then. So that, no, we're having none of your bullshit today. So that is a very different creature. That said, an actual global anarcho-communist, you couldn't even call it a state. You're talking about the absolute abolition of all governments, without even my concept of a roving magistrate, mercenary, private corporation enforced law of only contract situation. You don't even need that at this point. If everybody lives forever, and this is the most important key factor for that discussion, and you have Star Trek level unlimited energy and unlimited resource production. Replicators free and available to anyone's use that can just generate everything you want them to generate. And let's be clear, in this theoretical, hypothetical world, in order for that to exist, those replicators, they cannot be the sort of replicator that you walk up and order tea, hot, Earl Grey, and receive a cup of something that's not quite, but almost entirely unlike tea. It can't be a replicator that just spits out a badly passing replica. Whatever comes out of the replicator has to be not just perfect, but beyond the expectations of the requester. Because otherwise, there will continue to be some sort of a market space for people who prefer real meat or real fresh grown vegetables, just for an example, right? I prefer native cocaine to synthetic cocaine. There will be a black market if the replicator isn't a perfect replicator. It has to not create something that is a reasonable facsimile. It has to create the actual thing that is indistinguishable from the real counterpart at the deepest molecular level. Guys, I'm not saying that technology isn't possible, but we don't have it. And we don't even have any real viable interests in that direction. I haven't seen anything in technology news about the closest thing we've got is there are 3D printers that are printing with cloned biological material, printing artificial meat products, which that's a scary thought. But what we are not seeing yet in these conversations, even though we've got Kurzweil talking about possible immortality as derived through medical technology and primarily the use of nanobots and genetic engineering, thankfully we are not yet seeing, oh hey, we'll just go ahead and print you a meat sock, and when you're ready to shuffle off this mortal coil, we'll just go full on Heinleinian transfer and just put you in a new body, right? And so now that I've gotten that far, I had considered, I had been wanting to talk a little bit about Robert A. Heinlein and I Will Fear No Evil. So I've got 4 minutes, so let me get into that. Guys, this is one of those things. I'm gonna make a reading suggestion. If you haven't read it before, go do yourself a favor. Honestly, you need to read the entire Heinleinian future history lexicon, just the whole damn thing. It's brilliant work. It includes A Stranger in a Strange Land, The Moon is a Harsh Mistress, The Cat Who Walks Through Walls, Friday, things of that nature. But in particular, for this conversation, I want you to read I Will Fear No Evil and Time Enough for Love. Okay? Time Enough for Love follows the character Lazarus Long, who just lives essentially forever. Lazarus Long is maybe not immortal, but he lives for a very, very long time. And it's kind of done in the style of a Trials of Job type of story. And it's very good. It's very good work. And there's a lot of it's science fiction, but there's a lot of complex theological and philosophical concept development and kind of essayance going into that work. I Will Fear No Evil takes a very interesting tack at the concept of immortality. And so the character in there, and it's been a while since I read the book, and I meant to look up the character name this morning, but the primary character in I Will Fear No Evil is basically Donald Trump, but older and more impotent and richer, right? So imagine Donald Trump is 180 years old, and he basically hires all the best medical minds in the world to keep an eye out for a young, healthy body as a donor body. And there's this whole like McGuffin thing in there where the that main character has I think he has a very rare blood type, and so they actually have trouble finding a donor body. And then there's a bad car accident, and a young lady, mid-20s, who happens to have the correct blood type, is almost completely uninjured in the accident, but suffers a head injury sufficient to cause an irrecoverable brain trauma. So she's not going to wake up. She is functionally dead. And while her family's debating on whether or not to pull the plug, the old man's lawyers come and make an offer, and they transfer the old man's brain into the young woman's body. And so now you've got an old man who has been wealthy, like unimaginably wealthy for what is efficiently forever in the understanding of the average person, because he's already had his life medically extended to get to nearly 200 years old by the time the story takes place. And you're talking about a man who's so old that he's been impotent. He hasn't had a sex life in nearly a century, right? But he does have children, and of course they're all adult children. He's got several children with several different baby mamas, and he despises the children. This is a very amusing but complex and important part of the story, because when he gets his mind transferred into the young lady, his children sue for his estate to be executed as if he had died. And so he has to go as a young woman now, right? So there's an argument to be made that part of what this is discussing is transgenderism generally. And there's a lot of stuff in there with, how does a straight man suddenly installed in a woman's body deal with the urges and drives of a person in their sexual prime that has that physical gender. They have the physical sex of a woman and the mental gender of a man because of a bizarre medical experiment in a science fiction story. But the most fascinating part of it to me was all of the legal proceeding, where they're making the arguments about the philosophy of identity and what makes a person a cohesive, continuous whole. Whether or not a person who's had a foreign brain installed into their body, is that identity the original body? Is it the original mind? Or is it a new identity conglomerated of the two? And one of the funniest bits about the whole story is he actually makes it a point to say that his children are a bunch of ungrateful, useless shits. And if he could, if it weren't for his hatred of his useless, spoiled children, whose mothers have ruined them by just basically raising them on his money and being a drain, that he would just say, screw it. I've made and lost and made again a dozen massive fortunes. I'll just do it over again. But he makes it a point to go ahead with the court proceedings and defend his holdings, because he just doesn't want the little bastards to get any of his money. And that's hilarious, especially once it starts talking about the cost of such a defense and really explores some of the deeper philosophical concepts of what creates contiguous identity. So that's a great book for your shelf. That's I Will Fear No Evil. Go check that one out. And like I said, really anything by Heinlein, but especially as far as the philosophical questions of immortality, Time Enough for Love, and I Will Fear No Evil. Okay, so I got to put a pin in it there. I got to get down the road and shoot some houses. I appreciate you guys watching, and we love you, and we will see you tomorrow.